Started in February 2009. This actually started in Chicago in 1951 for the purpose of solving all the world's problems. They're still working at it. They've had over 3,000 speakers. We're on speaker number 451. So we put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter we listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. Our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, to close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time to do it. Come on up here.
No, I just want to know, did you get some ketchup for your French fries?
No, I didn't ask for any. What, today?
No,
That picture of you and
Facebook.
Whopper on Facebook I put with you and 25,000.
Oh, French fries? Oh, no, I don't remember.
He doesn't
Have a good memory, but it's short.
It was cute.
I did it.
You did, yeah.
Yeah.
I said you need some ketchup.
Oh, I need ketchup, all right. But anyway, you got any announcements?
Yeah, I got one.
This happens to be coincidental. The Dallas Philosophers Forum is meeting on the 26th, which is Tuesday, which is that this coming?
No,
It's
No,
next
26th will be next Tuesday. And it just so happens that the talk will be on free will and determinism.
Wow.
And I'll be speaking here on free will and determinism next week. So, so you can get two sides of the issue, I think. I don't know, it might be the same side. But anyway, that'll be at El Phoenix at Skillman and Adelia. Starts at 7:30. You can come for dinner at 6 if you want. And it's $5. So you're welcome to come.
I want to announce that Ed Stone died yesterday.
Yeah.
Some of you may know him. He was Rosalinda Stone's husband, ex-husband. What can I say about Ed?
He was a very brilliant man.
He was a brilliant guy. He was.
Nice man.
Very nice.
Some of you may know him.
Good
Anyway,
mathematician.
a mathematician, and he was in a nursing home, and things went sour. And
No, at the hospital.
at the hospital, yeah.
Oh, mine.
So anyway,
I still got phones.
he died yesterday. There's no announcement as to when it's going to be or where it's going to be. Funeral arrangements. But eventually, if we hear anything, we'll let you know. Okay.
Who else died?
Who else died? Nobody. Don Selly, who was here, is in Chicago now. He's got pneumonia, but he may pull him through, so that's a good thing.
How's Jim doing? Jim Carey. Yeah.
Jim, I just talked to him today. He's doing better. He said he might be back in about a month. He's up in Allen, Texas. If anybody wants to see him, I got his phone number here. And if you want that, you can talk to him. But he's doing all right, but he's slow recovery. He broke his arm and he was in bad shape. So he's got a feeding tube and everything. So anyway,
What?
he was on a feeding tube and everything. I don't know if he still is, but he was talking about it today. Anyway,
It's great to sit there, just don't lean forward.
Yeah.
You guys need to take your pneumonia. Yeah.
anyway, our speaker next week is Ken Sauter. He's sitting right here. He's going to talk about can free will be reconciled with determinism. I'm not going to read all this, but it's on your itinerary. And you can look it over. On March 30th, we have George Lujak. He's going to talk about in the beginning God is Earth, only 6,000 years old. It's interesting. And he'll be here talking about that. On April 6th, Impact Applied Barrel, Bonnie Parker and her baby daughter. That's Jim Gatewood. He's going to be talking about that. He's an author. It's on your itinerary. April 20th on psychic research, on psychic phenomena research. That's Chris Bolt.
Closed for Easter week.
He's going to be doing that.
Are you going to be?
No. April 27th, how to avoid any Democrat. On April 13th, we have one scheduled. Chris Molda. I don't have it on here yet, but I just sent it in. And he'll be talking, I forget what he's talking about, but anyway, he'll be, April, you can look it up on the internet, it'll be on there shortly. April 27th, How to Avoid Indian Democratic and Free Society. Doug Binkley and a Chicago-based author and Peter Perot, they're from Chicago, they're gonna come down here and they haven't been here in a couple of
What
years.
day?
April 27th, they'll be doing that. May 4th and May 11th, I've got speakers lined up, but they're in progress. May 18th, What Makes Us Human, Jan Lee, PhD in anthropology, she'll be talking about that here. That'll be interesting. May 25th is the next open date for a speaker. Anyway, that's all I have on that. Our
Yes.
Our speaker tonight is Dr. Dale Klosterman. He's a geologist and licensed psychologist. He's going to talk about Are the Gods Still With Us? He will consider the veracity of Eric von Däniken's new book, The Gods Never Left Us. Von Däniken has written many books on the subject, including Chariots of the Gods. Well, without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Dale Klosterman.
Well, let me start by telling you that it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. This isn't the first time I've done this for the College of Complexes, but the first time I ever talked about this particular subject. I want you to know that I was at the very first College of Complexes meeting. We had 6 people, and the subject was capital punishment.
Is that all we
Pro
have?
and con. So anyway, you know, Tom and Susan and another couple and I went to Tucson I guess it's been about a month ago now. There was a big gem and mineral and jewelry show. We had a great time. We'd been planning this for months, and we were going to take the train. Tom, you know, worked for the railroad for a long time. So anyway, but Susan almost ruined it before we even got started. I mean, one day she told me, she said, you know, sometimes the food is pretty good. And I thought, well, okay. And she said, and you'll be glad that you don't have to walk all the way back to the Pullman car, because what they'll do is you just convert your seat into a bed and you can sleep there all night. Except you have to sleep on your back. And so I thought, oh, this isn't sounding too good. And she said, of course, try not to go to the toilet. So anyway, as it turned out, the train never showed up.
Really? No. But
So we wound up flying Southwest.
tell
so-
them who didn't believe the train wasn't going to show up. Tom Barry, right?
Well, okay. So the way I got roped into doing this, while we were in Tucson, I mentioned that I had read a really interesting book, and I said it was by a fellow named Eric von Däniken, and it's called The Gods Are Still Among Us. And so I started telling them about the book, and they laughed and they said, "Where did you get that crazy stuff?" And I said, "Well, this is the fellow who wrote, you know, Chariots of Fire, and you know they made a movie out of it, and you know it's really pretty interesting." And they both laughed at it, you know. And my wife, oh, you should have seen her. She went into hysterics when she saw what I was reading. So anyway, then I guess Tom thought about this for a minute, and he said, "Hey, Dale," he said, "listen, I got a great idea." He said, "You know, the attendants at College of Complexes has been dropping off a little bit. He said, how about giving a talk on this book? And I said, are you kidding me? I said, my wife probably won't let me do that. You notice my wife isn't here. So anyway,
Here you are.
It's a good topic.
So I thought that I would, do Tom a big favor and go ahead and try to give a talk on this particular subject. I'm going to wait until later to tell you what I really feel about it, because I don't want to set up any enemies too quickly. So, well,
What happened? Ice, overflow of ice. It's okay.
I'm trying to get a good position here so I can read. There are really two ways to study the possibility of aliens living among us. This is probably the only time I'm going to use the word aliens, because I like the words gods from other planets. I think that sounds more exciting. So anyway, there are two ways of actually looking at this subject according to von Däniken. And the first is to take a look at what he calls chemical evolution studies, which includes genetics. And I'm going to try to give you a thumbnail sketch of how genetics would fit in here. The other way of taking a look at this subject is through anthropological or archaeological studies. And so I'm going to read a lot of this tonight. I was afraid that at my age, I was afraid that if I would try to just talk off the cuff, that I would lose my place. So anyway, von Däniken begins his book by trying to show some shortcomings to the current Darwinian approach to how human and all species developed over the millennia from about 1.2 billion years ago before the present. 1.2 billion years ago is when it's determined that, species began to appear. So anyway, the orthodox way of looking at the development of humans is the idea of a primordial stoop, which you've probably all heard about, and Darwinian evolution based on mutation and natural selection. Von Däniken reports that there are probably as many as 100 scholarly books on the market that refute all parts of Darwinian evolution. Von Däniken isn't totally opposed to evolution, but he believes that evolution, that we need more time. He believes that evolution is a key approach right now because scholarly people refuse to take a look at anything else. Well, anyway, 44 years ago, James Coppledge insisted that the possibility of molecules docking in the right position was just simply impossible. In 1973, Crick and Orgel said that an unknown intelligence ensured that life in the universe would arise. Crick and Orgel said that an unknown intelligence ensured that life in the universe would arise according to the same blueprint. In other words, people from another planet had a blueprint, and they made the rounds of other planets that they felt were habitable, and they actually set the stage for life to take place on Earth, as they did with other habitable places. They sent out a spaceship with various organisms that were then distributed on whatever planet they were working with. Crick and Ortegal, for the first time, suggested that the origin of life might have occurred somewhere else besides the Earth itself. Von Onigen said that the Darwinian theories were simply a misapprehension. And an Indian, a young man from India named Rick Rama Singh analyzed the possibility of chemical evolution, and he said you can forget the idea of a primordial soup. So there are people out there who really don't agree with the current theory of evolution. Well, you're going to have to listen closely to this. This is von Donigen's description of a genetic approach, one that is very simple to understand. And so I'll probably read this to you twice. Anyway, he says that genes are sections of DNA, which are blueprints for RNA, from which proteins are created, and all of this together is called a genome. The genomes exist in strings called chromosomes, and chromosomes are packaged in the cell nucleus. And with this, you have the genetic code, and this is the key to every life form. Is it necessary to read that over again?
No.
I mean, just believe that in von Donigen's eyes, it would be very simple to create a being. It would be very simple to create well, the example that von Daniken gave was, he said it would be very simple to capture one of the great apes and to do some work with the DNA and make whatever changes the geneticists wanted to make, including language. So anyway, he says that every geneticist knows how to do this. It's called cloning. He goes on to say that a retrovirus like AIDS could easily do this, and you'd have an example of quick mutation. So von Donigen believes that there's quick mutation and slow mutation. For quick mutation, that would be the type of mutation that you would find on the Earth in a short period of time. For a longer period of time, for most of the life forms on Earth, it would take a much longer time than what we're actually allotting. There are some species that are so complicated that they would actually need either a slow type of evolution or maybe a way to speed up the evolutionary process. Von Donigen called this process an evolutionary motor. Well, to get to the heart of the matter, von Donigen gives many examples of times when aliens, gods, performed mutations on humans. From the literature, he says that we may have called this artificial insemination. Good examples would include the Old Testament characters like Sarah and Rebecca, inseminations by the Holy Spirit. He mentions the king of Salem, Melchizedek, Egyptian gods, Alexander the Great, the Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal. Von Däniken also says that some scientists believe that the gods actually set up a space station that hovered in orbit over the Earth, and they used it as a hospital where they wanted to make changes in maybe people or animals that they wanted to make some changes in. Okay, well, so much for, I guess, for chemical evolution, according to Von Däniken. The real question is, are UFOs really real or not? So, moving into the archaeological story, the question is, who could have sent the building blocks of life? And the answer for him is the same people who visited Earth thousands of years ago, the UFO people. There are, and I'm going to give you a list of pieces of evidence that Von Däniken uses to support what I've said so far. He says, even with hundreds of thousands of erroneous reports about flying saucers, there are many reports that cannot be explained away and could actually be real visitors from space. There are many structures and designs left in cornfields that cannot be explained except to say that there are things beyond this world. Von Däniken wrote a book, he wrote a book, it's called Remnants of the Gods. And in this book, it's a compendium of pictures that have been taken around the world of cornfields and designs and structures and huge boulders in place and things like that are just inexplainable as far as anybody is concerned, unless you think of gods from other planets. We have traditions that are, he goes on and he says, we have traditions that are thousands of years old, the same traditions in more locations than one across. Says we have traditions that are thousands of years old, and they have the same traditions in more locations than just one. I can't read the way I'm written this, so I'm going to skip it. So he goes on and he says, we have many myths and legends and stories from China and South America that were told long before the European explorers visited. There were stories of creation and many visits, many stories about visitors by gods, flying vehicles of all types. There's the story about Columbus when he discovered the New World, and the indigenous people who saw these strange people arriving decided that they must be the gods that were returning again as they had once promised. Well, Pierre Grimmel defines a myth as a chronologically disordered history. Every myth or legend reflects, as shown by science, a state or real event, an event that should not be doubted without some really scientific study. And another fellow named Wolheim, 140 years ago, said that myths are the sublime expressions of the most sublime truth and much more. Well, we have traditions that are thousands of years old about humans and animals created by the gods. Donnegan gives examples such as the Sumerian king Gilgamesh. This would have been in Sumer, which was probably about 3,500 years before BC. Well, the Sumerian king Gilgamesh, who was supposedly 2/3 God and 1/3 man, and he mentions also the Lamech scrolls that are associated with Noah's ancestry. I looked up the Lamech scrolls to see if I could get some idea what they were, and I really had a hard time. You may want to look them up. It's spelled Lamech. In Stone Age cultures that are thousands of kilometers apart, we can find the same stories about gods. It's also true that somebody created some type of order for the chaos. And he says in the Bible that there was utter chaos in the beginning. And Von Donnegan uses this, and he says that that the ancient people got the geological and biological sequence correct. And he points out that many legends talk about the changes that took place and the changes that took place. And he points out that humans were helpless and the gods taught them everything that they know. Well, I got a star by this next one. I have down that all of the stories among the ancient world cultures begin with a creation story from chaos. They also add something about teaching from the gods and a promise that the gods would again someday return. There is no shortage of ancient myths that include flying vehicles, ancient traditions among the Maoris, Samoans, and other indigenous people from Polynesia are all very similar. Just as a quick break, I was in New Zealand some years ago with a club that I belong to called Friendship Force International, and what we do is exchange visits with people in other countries. So when we got to the Maoris, and the Maoris pride themselves on being fierce, and when they dance, they go and make facial, and they look really scary. Well, as we were watching this dance take place, and the men were moving back and forth with that scary look on their face, all of a sudden this little boy, he must have been about 4 years old, and he was sitting in the first row, and there's this line of Maoris came out, these men, and they were making their facial expressions. This little boy went right back at it, but they were laughing so hard that they couldn't continue the meetings.
He was one of them.
Well, anyway,
Daddy.
in a myth from ancient Egypt, Nun was the endless ocean of stars from which the primal god Osiris arrived in a golden ship. This is the way the legend goes. Iris, on the other hand, arrived in a similar vehicle. This is taken from, from legends and myths that are very well known. There's another legend from Sumer. This is the Sumerians, like 3,500 years ago. And it's a story. It was written on lapis, which is a semi-general and semi-precious gemstone. But it's a story written on lapis about the relationship between two gods who maintain a bond between earth and heaven. By the way, the people from Sumer were the first ones to come up with a system of writing. The Finns have a legend about a flaming bird. Exodus 19:18 has a story about a flaming vehicle. A fellow named Tejuan pointed out that the ancient Avenue de los Muertes is laid out as a model of our solar system. Indicating that the only way that this is possible is if they had help from, some of the gods. The Uruk in Mesopotamia is a city modeled on a heavenly city on another star. And the city of Hankow in China is also a city modeled on a city on another star. The Maasai in East Africa have a story of a couple of people who were sent to heaven to learn and then to return to teach. And apparently this is what happened. They sent a couple of people to heaven to learn, and they learned and they returned to teach the other Maasai indigenous people. In South Africa, they have a similar legend. I don't know if that's so unusual because the Maasai are, I believe, in South Africa. So that may not be such an unusual
The Dugongs.
happening. But anyway, you know how I know that?
How?
My wife and I went to the symphony the other night. By the way, the symphony was Mahler. Oh my God, it was the most exciting symphony I think we've ever seen. But anyway, our driver was from South Africa. And he told us that the native language was Swahili. And he said that the larger group of people were the Maasai. And so that's how I knew that. Anyway, the Bantu in South Africa believed that maize was brought to earth by the gods. And finally, the Japanese tribe of Yamasuchi believed that demigods on earth commuted between heaven and earth on a regular basis. And now to finish off and put a little psychology into it. Everybody's probably familiar with Carl Jung. And Carl, the famous thing about Carl Jung is that he has speaks of a second unconscious. You know, you have the consciousness, you have the pre-conscious, which is if you think of something, that's something that you can think about and bring back to consciousness is the pre-conscious. There's the regular unconscious that you bring to consciousness maybe through dreams or something like that. And then you have the collective unconscious, which contains what are called archetypes. And archetypes are well, I try to think of a good way to describe archetypes. Is there another psychologist in the crowd? Anyway, archetypes are theories or ideas or people that that people in the species Homo sapiens have in their unconscious. For example, an archetype that we probably all have is that of a hero. Everybody likes heroes, and those not heroes, and books are all written about heroes. They talk about Amazon women. There are other ideas. When I was majoring in geology at the University of Cincinnati, we would go around and we would say, "Hey Fred, do you know what ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny?" And he'd say, "Yeah, you know, I heard that, and that's really interesting." And what that means is that during the embryonic stage, some people believe that the embryo goes through all the stages of the species until birth. And maybe you've heard of this. And so that's the ontogeny. And the ontogeny is the embryonic stages, and the phylogeny is the happenings that took place during the development of the species itself. But anyway, the reason I tossed archetypes in here is because I see a similarity between some of the things I've been talking about and Jung's approach. I'll tell you one last story, and then I'll open it up to questions. But as a psychologist, I retired from the federal prison system, and so I had lots of different types of groups.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Oh, sorry. The reason I was over there is because I can't see you if I stand here. But to get away from that light. So anyway.
Can we turn it off now, Tom? There we go.
Okay.
Here we are.
There you are, yeah. So, what I was telling you is that when I worked for the federal prison system, and we had all kinds of groups, and we had behavior modification groups and just all kinds of groups. And I had a group that the inmates were really getting kind of bored with it. And I said, how would you like to do something really exciting? And they said, what do you got on your mind? And I said, well, how many of you like to interpret dreams or would like to interpret dreams? Of course, they all raised their hand. So what we decided to do was to have a dream analysis group. And I gave everybody a tablet, and I I taught them how to, if you wake up like in the middle of the night and you've had a dream, write it down right away. And I taught them how to keep a diary. And I taught them, I gave them an introduction course to Jungian theory. And we talked about archetypes, and we talked about, you know, the different Jungian characters like the shadow, things like that. And when they would come into the group, they would take turns sharing dreams, and the idea over a period of time was to see if they came up with themes that were recurrent. Scary. Okay, so anyway, so Tom, the next thing that happens is
Q&A.
Then you get to know your own
Questions?
Question and answer. We need the microphone.
Yeah, I got it here. Are you ready for questions?
yeah.
Okay. Who wants to be first? Oh, okay.
Hello, Dale. You indicated that you would actually give your opinion on Denikin's book. So would you kindly do that?
Yeah.
Please?
Well, you know, I remember when I was a little kid, running out into a field with my cousins, watching the flying saucers, and I've always hoped that flying saucers were real. And
when?
can you hear me?
When?
Oh, when? I mean, when did that happen?
Yes, when did that happen?
It was probably back around in the 40s. It was probably like maybe, it might have been just before 1950, something like that.
Okay.
And it was in Kentucky. And we went out and we watched these blobs, whatever they were, going back and forth between the trees. But I would like to believe that the flying saucers are real, and I know that some of the stuff that I read here is a little far out, but I don't disbelieve it, and so.
So do you believe in panspermia?
What, I say that again?
Panspermia? In other words, aliens came here and seeded life on this planet?
Oh, well, what von Däniken is trying to point out is that he's trying to point out that the gods were real, and that they were landing on the earth, you know, as early as the earliest people, and maybe before the earliest people. He believes that the gods actually set the stage and actually brought the seed for the first species that occurred. As far as he believes that the aliens are still here. He doesn't really say what they look like, or he doesn't go into any detail about why they're here or what they're doing here, but I would guess that he is saying that it's still an experimental thing. That these are intellectual beings that are far beyond us, and they're still trying to understand. Well, actually, what they're trying to do, he said it's amazing that if this is an experiment by gods from a different planet, why don't we intercede? Why don't the gods intercede? And like we say, if God is real, why doesn't God do something about this? Well, he's saying the same thing, but he's talking about the aliens. He's saying if this is a big experimental project, why aren't they doing something about this experimental project that's just simply gone awry?
You want a question?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I, like you, studied quite a bit about alien and all, and I was happy to find, I don't know if you've heard of Alien at the Pentagon. You can go online and read about the alien that was present, I guess that was in the 60s maybe. And there's quite a story about working in the Pentagon. The man spoke, what, 100 languages, I think. He looked just like us, of course. It shows a picture of him.
The one thing that I started to point out, or maybe I said a little bit about it, but it's believed that at one time the people spoke just one language, and it was the language of the aliens. And as an example, he uses the legend or the myth or the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. And he says, here's your evidence right here. The Tower of Babel. Everybody was speaking the same language. And he says that language was the alien language. And of course, after the Tower of Babel, after everybody was dispersed, then, other languages developed. But of course, he's also saying that you could capture somebody and, you could capture an animal and you could change it any way you wanted to, and you could make the great apes talk, is basically what he's saying.
When I first read Chariots of the Gods a number of years ago, I thought it was very fascinating. But of the two principal theories of where we came from, the older theory is that somebody of a greater intelligence, that we was given the name of God to create us and Earth. The revisionist theory is that we all happened by chance. Well, if we reject those two theories and we take von Däniken's premises or hypothesis that aliens came here and either started us, that Finland pointed out, or intervened into the process, where did the aliens come from?
So that's the question. If you hadn't said it, that's what I was going to say. The question is, where did the aliens come from? How did they originate? So it's like the chicken or the egg, you're sort of going like this. So I guess you have to, again, say this is something that we do not have the intelligence to understand. We just don't have the answer.
Well, it's a very clever storyline, but it seems like it begs that if you can't answer the question of where the aliens come from, we're back to the starting spot. We don't know anything.
Well, what Däniken is saying is that, they came from somewhere in space, and they were, with their intelligence, they were able to locate different planets where they could plant the seed of a species, and then they could watch it grow and develop and mature. And
maybe they're selling season tickets to a show called People on Earth, and they want to get further down, collect more revenue before they intervene and stop the storylines generating so much interest.
Well, here's the deal. I told Tom that, he says, what if somebody asks you a question you can't answer? And I said that, well, if that happens, I'm gonna open it up to the audience and see who can answer that question. So how about answering it?
Well, I don't think there really is an answer. I've seen Von Daniken's stuff on YouTube. He's a very clever guy. I think he's a good science fiction writer. But as far as learning where we came from, as you just pointed out, if you don't know, if you can't even hypothesize where the aliens come from, then it really provides no additional information. That's not to say he is a smart guy and he is a clever storyteller, but it seems like we basically have, it's like computer science, it's a 0-1 logic. Either things happen spontaneously, or there's some exogenous force, intelligence, that created us. And if you extend this back to the aliens, or the aliens before the aliens, or before those aliens, you still got the same basic two questions.
So you're back right where you started.
Pardon?
So you're back right where you started.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
One quick question, are you familiar with megaliths?
What?
Megaliths?
Like Stonehenge.
Very large stones found in
Monoliths.
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 There's a lot of them in Ecuador, Bolivia,
Yeah.
and Peru, but also in the Middle East and other
You
parts of the
know,
world.
I just briefly mentioned something about large stones, but, he spent a lot of time talking about the pyramids, and he talks about being able to move these huge stones. And in this book that he wrote, it's called Elements. It's called Remnants of the Gods. This book is made up of just one picture and story after another about this very thing. And he shows pictures of these monoliths and like how in the world could these people at such an early date move these things. Somebody else?
Yes, it seems to me that to even think that there is a beginning is pretty limited thinking. Because who would have created a creator? There is no time in eternity. And there is the constant evolution of star systems and planets throughout time. We see it happening all over the universe now. You'll have supernovas and that one's gone and others get formed. And there are items that have been found on this planet that have technology beyond anything we know how to do, that are millions and millions of years old.
See, a person who is, spiritual, very religious, would just simply say that we're not capable of understanding these things as human beings, but when we get to heaven, it will all be revealed to us. I mean, I'm not joking. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Oh, there's another book, well, I've read so many books about aliens, but Abduction, have you read that by a college professor, Harvard college professor? It's kind of scary, really. Talks about the aliens abducting women and we're having hybrids on Earth that are part alien, part human.
Believe it.
I taught a course one time. It was called Addictive Behavior at Amberton University, and I included among the addictions people. There are a lot of people who claim they were abducted.
Yes.
And so other people think that these people have some type of a complex. And so they were included as somebody with a, addiction. Somebody with an addiction. But yes, I mean, there was a little booklet that I used, with the class, and it explained that people should be tolerant of other people who were saying that because it could very well be real, instead of just in their mind.
With all of the pyramids and various large objects that have been developed in the past, with technology that far exceeded the technological capabilities of the current people that were at that time living, that they theorized supposedly built it, that we probably know for sure that those people did not build the pyramids, that they were built probably by beings that were much more advanced, and maybe that there could have been a civilization that existed prior to ours that wasn't at one time more advanced, that met with the cataclysm, and we are the remnants of another civilization that possibly was destroyed.
Yeah.
A lot of people think
That's, it's possible. I have another paper, I brought it with me just in case I needed it, but it's about the first Homo sapiens. Well, it goes further back than that, but the first Homo sapiens who began to migrate, they started in Africa. And they had pretty much decided the time that different people migrated to different places. They know when they first went to China, when they crossed the Bering Strait. So they have all this down, you know, as though, you know, it's really pretty well agreed upon. When they talk about these big rocks and things like that, and they have some pretty sophisticated ways of determining the age. There are four that I can't remember the names, I should have written them down, but there are four really sophisticated ways of determining the age of different things.
Well, there's carbon dating.
Well, carbon dating is one. They had three that I'd never heard of before. That doesn't mean anything, but so they can do a pretty good job of telling, you know, when something actually took place.
I guess since I'm holding the microphone, I'll piggyback off what he was saying. But you know, there's a lot of structures around the world that way technologically advanced for the time. I mean, you look at Pumapunko with laser-cutted rocks, and Angkor Wat looks like it was made out of poured stone. It's technology that.
You see, there are things that took place like as early as 3,500 years ago, and the only way that this could have happened, perhaps, is to have somebody with higher intelligence. Like if you design a street, like the Avenue of the Dead in Mexico, I guess that's what it was, and somebody with a higher intelligence would have to have told them how to do that and what it was actually depicting. And what he's saying that it's so common, and there are so many places. What I gave you tonight is just sort of like a short summary of everything that he points out in his book. So.
For any of you all who are interested in pursuing these esoteric topics, which I find absolutely fascinating, you can do two things. Go to the internet, look up Antikythera device, ANTIKYTHERA. It is it was discovered about 100 years ago in the Aegean Sea, and it gets its name from an island called Antikythera Island in Greece. And the first 50 or 75 years was all encrusted, and they kind of didn't know what it was. When we started x-raying it, it looks like it has intermeshing gears like a clock, And they finally figured out that it was a very sophisticated kind of it predicts, you predicts the rotation of the planets and stuff. And it is just beyond, I mean, I don't know how they could have manufactured that, but that's something. The other thing is look up Hidden Inca Tours, and that will take you to this guy that shows all these big megalithic stones. It's fascinating. The question is, do you think any of that ties in to von Daniken hypothesizes, or do you think maybe at one time that our ancestors were in some ways much more sophisticated technologically than we are?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't believe so. That's for me to say, but I believe that I believe that it's pretty well set. What people came from where and where they went, and if you see me afterwards, I'll show you the sketch, you know, and it's pretty well determined. Tom, how much time do I have here?
Okay, well, can he sit down? He's hungry.
Well, what's interesting is our DNA, we have lots of DNA, you know, that we really don't know why we have all that DNA. We don't use that much. So it stands to reason maybe it was given to us by who knows what.
Now,
Yeah. Okay.
That's for the upgrades.
You can sit down.
sit down. I'm going down. I'm going to go down and get. I'm going to get some chicken cacciatore.
Okay, now it's your time to talk. You get 5 minutes up here to respond to the speaker had to say either for or against. So, who wants to be first? Somebody wants to be first.
Well, this is certainly an interesting topic. I remember the first time I heard about Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods. I think I was a teenager. And I thought, man, that's really screwy. This guy thinks we came from aliens or something like that. And I didn't really, it was one of those things that like, well, maybe it could be true, but I don't know, you know. And I kind of just dismissed it. But, you know, I've since read some things about that Eric von Daniken has said. I think I've heard, I don't know if I've heard him speak, but I know about him and about what his message is. And the only problem, I think, with the panspermia idea, which is the idea that aliens came here and seeded the planet or whatever, is that you have to keep going back to where those aliens come from, and where did the aliens come from that seeded them, and the aliens that seeded them. Eventually, you have to come to a first cause.
Right.
This is the issue, like when somebody says, well, if God created the universe, who created God? And then who created that God? Well, that's just an infinite regression. And if you take an infinite regression to its logical end, it doesn't end. It just keeps going. So at some point, there has to be a first cause. Okay? In my opinion, that's God. But despite that, there's, you know, Eric von Daniken and a lot of people in that field, Zachariah Sitchin and a lot of other scholars, people that have looked into that, talk a lot about the gods creating or engineering human beings. And although I am prone to dismiss that, because I think we were created by God and put here, it keeps popping up from all different quarters. So I think there's something there that needs to be looked at. And I don't know all the answers for sure, and just like a lot of you have mentioned or nodded your heads in agreement that there's a lot of technology that had to be used to create a lot of these megaliths that we don't have. And I find it quite arrogant on the part of scientists or scientism to insist that we are the smartest people around when we can't even do some of these things. So I think it would take, it would be a good lesson in humility to accept the fact that we don't know how they did those things, and maybe admit that they were a little bit smarter than we were, and that was a long time ago. So if you believe in evolution, that means we're getting dumber, not smarter.
Right. We went down from up, not up from down.
Yeah.
Well, I have notes that will exceed my 5-minute limit. Whenever there is technology that is beyond the comprehension of a people, they deify it. Give you a perfect example. During World War II, the Seabees went into a Pacific island where there was a little tribe, and they made a runway and they flew airplanes in and out of there during the war, and the war ended and they packed up and left. And for years after that, if not still, those tribal members make straw airplane replicas, put them up on poles, and worship them because they couldn't comprehend the technology. Crop circles are beyond our technology. The stalks are bent over, not broken, and it looks like they were heated the way they were bent over. And some of them are bent in layers, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. We can't do that. The Romans reported seeing these fiery shields go across the sky during the Roman years. Scared the heck out of everybody. The Zunis and the Hopis have in their legends that their ancestors came from the Pleiades star system. I had a friend who used to work for the Superconducting Super Collider project in Waxahachie. And his boss one day gave him an airline ticket and said, hey, fly out to Utah. They found something interesting. Well, he went out there. They picked him up in a van and some other guys. He figured about 60 miles northeast of Ogden, the Department of Energy was digging a deep hole to make a nuclear waste storage dump. And at a depth of 630 feet, they hit a solid object. They dug out around it and they hit another one. Then another one. They found 7 in a row on a north-south axis. They had taken a crane and brought 2 of them to the surface. Bill brought back 8.5 by 11 photographic prints of these things. They looked like 2 big horseshoes with straight shafts joining them from the ends of the horseshoes down. They were ribbed around the side. You could see where the flash line of the mold was on the back. And with the comparison of men standing in the photograph alongside, I figured that they were about 45 feet high and 60 feet long. They found that the material they are made out of is harder than diamond, and they had no welding equipment that could get hot enough to melt it. And they had, they put a scanning electron microscope up on the surface to try to look at the molecular structure, and they got back a printed language all over the thing. And they had both Chinese and Russian linguists there trying to decipher this language. Nobody knew what that language was. But the language was written in characters that were only microns, thousandths of an inch in height, which we couldn't even do at that time. I remember reading years ago that out west there was this mountain. I forget which state it was years ago I read this, that miners went in and went bonk, they hit something. Other miners from another side hit something. Pretty soon the federal government found out about it and they took over the mountain and ran everybody else out. And the story is they found a flying saucer inside of that mountain. And they entered it and they found the badly decomposed bodies of small aliens and baby dinosaurs. And they estimated that thing had been there 150 million years. The French did an experiment years ago. They took some people and put them in a warehouse where they were completely deprived of any kind of sensory perception of night and day. No clocks, no sounds, nothing. And they found that everybody reverted to a natural cycle of a 25-hour clock instead of a 24-hour clock, which happens to be the period of the day on Mars. Interesting. my mother was probably the most honest person I've ever known. On her deathbed testimony basically, she recited back in the 40s when we lived in Florida. One night everybody was asleep, the lights were out, she was sitting in a rocking chair just thinking, looking out the window over a tennis court we had, and a flying saucer landed in that tennis court and stayed there some time and then flew off. My sister, many years later, had a recurring dream for several years, and that was that a flying saucer landed in our yard between 4 tall trees while there was a cabbage palm at each corner of the tennis court. And an all gold colored man took her on board, flew her out over the coast of California and brought her back. For whatever that's worth, recurring dream. In Amsterdam, I remember hearing this on the news one time, there was a man who was a bouncer at a club in Amsterdam, and some guys one night got drunk and hauled him out into the alley and killed him. Well, they did an autopsy and they found out that that man had no known human type of blood. He was not an earth human. And as far as why don't they intervene, from what I have read, there is a galactic federation that is monitoring and watching us, but they have a law that basically says you don't interfere with another planet. Let them evolve on their own, whether they make it or not. There was a book written by Daniel Fry, who worked at the White Sands Proving Ground. And the book was titled The White Sands Incident, and later he wrote another chapter and added to it and called it To Men of Earth. And he encountered a flying saucer that landed on that base. And he met the man who was in control of it, and he helped him assimilate into the earth. His mission was to work telepathically with the leaders of the United States and Russia to try to prevent a nuclear war that we were close to. And his ancestry had been from the earth when there was, what were the two civilizations? Lemuria in the Pacific and Atlantis in the Atlantic. There were two human civilizations that developed technologically, and they were very competitive but friendly. But then it got ugly and it ended in a nuclear war. And at the end of it, 5 craft landed on a high plateau that we call Tibet. 3 from one side, 2 from the other. They were the only ones left alive on the planet. And they realized they couldn't even stay on the planet, so they had to try to go somewhere else, which was Mars. 4 of the 5 ships made it. They didn't have a record of the 5th, and they set up a civilization on Mars until another large planetoid spacecraft that some race had formed and were just traveling the galaxy, meeting different races, met them, invited them to come on board. And when they saw, many years later, what was happening on the Earth, since he was a descendant of former Earth people, he was chosen to come here and perform that mission. That was an interesting book, incidentally, written by that engineer. Let me see. There was a geode found, I think, in the Mediterranean. You know, these little rock things, you break them open, they're full of crystals. They broke this one open. Now, these things are millions of years old. And they found an integrated circuit inside of that geode. I saw a photograph of that. The pyramids, we don't have the technology today to build the pyramids. All the engineering around the earth still can't do the pyramids, according to many engineers. And I think it's interesting that the people who seem to run this earth are on many levels, and they're very occult and symbolic. And if you look at the symbol on the dollar bill of the pyramid, the top part is cut loose and raised up. And I think it might be because it symbolizes that that group who rule this thing are not Earth humans. I think that's a possibility. I don't know that. That's about enough for now.
There's a gentleman that wrote a book, I think Everything You Know Is Wrong is the title of the book. It was a book by a gentleman, he's no longer alive now, called Lloyd Pye.
Oh, yeah.
And he had all kinds of scientific evidence that seemed to indicate that humanity had been spliced with other things, that there was evidence of in our chromosomes that our DNA had been spliced with other things, and that very deeply messed with. Very, very interesting books that he'd written a long time ago that I took a look at that stuff. No mention was mentioned of Albert's favorite author, Zachariah Stitchin. You know, in his talk about the Anunnaki, I think a lot of the Illuminati are trying to put forth the story that they look towards space gods as being their gods, and they seem to think that that's where we come from as well. I'm pretty sure from what I've heard, what they believe and what they teach. But they want to believe that they're superior to the rest of us, and that there were multiple species on this planet. There used to be one supposedly called Homo capensis, which is the being that had the very large elongated skulls, and that's a lot of theory. There's a lot of theories about that being the reason why the Vatican hats are so large to hide their elongated skulls, that sort of thing. You go back into ancient Hindu religions, they talk about the Vimanas, and those documents have been found, and they do look like spacecraft, and they discuss Mercury engines, which NASA is trying to develop Mercury engines, because liquid mercury somehow, when you spin it and electrify it, can somehow produce anti-gravity. A friend of mine that I knew from a talk group that we used to go to actually worked for NASA, and said he was in England, and they were having a lot of crop circles in this field, and he went out there and kind of meditated and asked for them to demonstrate that they were trying to communicate with him. The next day a crop circle appeared, and it basically showed a magnetic field, and his job at NASA dealt with ion magnetic propulsion systems. But you know, who knows? There was the Dogon tribe in Africa that claimed that a space being landed and gave them the information about where they came from, and described their star system where they came from as being Sirius, and that's why they call it the dog star, I guess, or
Binary star.
Binary star. But they basically, we found out that they were correct. That it is a binary star. The Mahabharata in the Hindu traditions describes wars that basically describe the effects of weapons that could have been atomic weapons, that people's hair was falling out, that their skin would burn, that sort of thing. And they describe all these different beings that were having all these battles and flying ships, and it's in the ancient manuscripts of which they claim their religion goes back 18,000 years. They have found since then an archaeological dig, I can't remember where it is, it has radioactivity that would indicate that it could have been an atomic bomb that caused that radioactivity, and it's 32,000. It's an archaeological dig, it's 32,000 years old. So we're talking even older than the 18,000. The theory was that the Zoroastrians and the Hindus were the true Aryan races, and that they were the victims of a cataclysm that they forced them to move from the northernmost portions of Siberia, where a supposed instant freezing effect happened, which led to them barely getting out alive. And they have found mammoths where they had food in their mouth that were frozen solid, and they weren't dead, they were actually frozen solid, standing up with food in their mouth, still chewing. So something froze that mammoth in its place while it was still alive.
In a tropical environment.
Yeah. And, you know, there are the certain maps that depict Antarctica that have been found without any ice. Now, a lot is coming out in the news about Antarctica. There are people talking about what's going on in Antarctica. You know what the Internet Archive is? It's a website you can go to and you can type in something. You can see the website, anybody's website, if it existed years and years ago, and it archives all the internet basically. But there are a few programs that you might find interesting. Otherwise, you have to pay for them on Gaia.tv. And one of them to search for on the Internet Archive, which is a program called Cosmic Disclosure. They've got seasons 1 through 4, and then skipped 5, and you got season 6. So each season is an interview with people that claim to have been deeply involved in what's called the secret space program. And the whole theory goes back to the days of the Nazis, that they had gotten off the planet prior to World War II. That there were secret societies called the Brill Society, that the Nazis scientists worked with these people. They weren't with the Nazis out of, you know, something that they wanted to do. They just because they were spiritual people that had been captured and put to work, that had the ability to remote view and use psychic abilities to communicate with off-world beings. And these off-world beings, the Nazis, you know, they were basically just like in the movie Indiana Jones. They're always looking for getting any advantage on developing weaponry, any advantage for that. Supposedly they went to India and found Vimanas and a working spacecraft that was an Indian spacecraft in a cave somewhere. But the Brill Society was doing automatic writing, and they were communicating with these beings, and supposedly they made good enough contact, and that the Germans forced them to try to get them to land on Earth and help them develop spacecraft, and, you know, would make trade arrangements to incentivize them to do that. And there was a battle in the Antarctic, near the Antarctic, in the ocean after the World War II, when Admiral Byrd led ships down there with a coalition of ships in Project High Jump, where they were attempting to discover if there were any German bases in the Antarctic, because they found documentation that suggested there would be, including maps. And so the theory was that they met with an interplanetary defense force that destroyed all the flying ships in the air, that made them turn tail and run. And since then, many maps have shown up that are on German Nazi letterhead that actually prove that they actually had tunnel system that went under the ice, came up, and that there underneath the ice there were holes under the ice, and they were able to build bases deep in the continent, as they could travel their submarines through water canyons and then come up and be in these under the ice bases. And then of course they started exploring the space, and in 1958 or 52, I can't remember what it was, supposedly you know, we brought over during Project I can't remember what was the project where Paperclip, where we brought all the Nazis over from yeah, well, probably a lot more than that. We brought over the intelligence operatives and the scientists that we could get from Germany, and supposedly word was they were in communications, and we thought we were going to steal all their secrets and take advantage of all their intelligence. We gave them all new identities, so they could all blend in with us, and we would never know who was a Nazi and who wasn't. So it's kind of, you know, we had Wernher von Braun was the most public one that most people knew about. But what if these people usurped power in our intelligence organizations that they were serving in, and were communicating
with their Antarctic friends that they knew how to communicate with. And we're still working with the space programs to develop these space programs, and using the military industrial might of the United States to be able to construct bigger and better craft, and then keep it all hush-hush. And now we've got bases on the moon, bases on Mars, maybe on every planet in the solar system that could already exist, with millions of people being kidnapped off the planet and taken to these planets to serve in near slave-like conditions. This is what is being talked about on that program I'm telling you about. A gentleman named Tompkins, William Tompkins, working for TRW, McDonnell Douglas, claimed to have briefed Admiral Forstall on spies that we had during the World War II that were embedded in Germany. And he said that they were working with off-world entities that were teaching them how to build spacecraft. Now, this is from a gentleman that's no longer alive. He died a few years ago. But he gave forth a lot of evidence that he knew what he was talking. There's other people he worked with that are still alive that are backing him up on this. And supposedly we had extraterrestrials on this planet working with us, with him, in fact. And he helped design some of the craft that are in the secret space program. And there are numerous people now that are coming forth as whistleblowers saying they've been on the craft, been off the planet, been outside the solar system, been on every planet there is, and they're existing in the media on different programs that you can watch online. So it's very real if they can prove it, and none of them have really been caught in a lie. They've been doing it for years, talking about this stuff. You would think that if they were making it all up, there would be holes that would be worn into their story that would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were lying. Unfortunately, the opposite has happened.
I remind you about Stitching?
You reminded me about a lot of things. In Alaska, when they were drilling wells up there, at 17 to 1900 feet, they started bringing up frozen frogs, not petrified or anything. And there was even the report that one of these frogs was put on a desk, it thawed out, and for a little while it kicked. And they can apparently go into hibernation like that and live for a long time. But this would be a very long time. Also up there, they brought up palm fronds that were green from down under. In Peru, you probably know about this, there was a little village ruled by this group of people, and the people who were being ruled got angry at the rulers one time and killed them all, dug a hole, put their bodies in, covered it up, and left the village. And all of the other villages around for 150 years made it taboo for anyone to go there until an archaeologist, I think around 20 years or so, if I'm remembering right, got permission to go there, and he found that grave hole where they put all the bodies, and he dug them up, and they all had extended cone-shaped skulls, and they all had 28 rather than 32 teeth. And there was even one pregnant female, and the fetus had 28 teeth and a coned head. And these, there are pictures you can find. There are some of these cone heads in a museum in Peru right now. And Queen Nefertiti had a long cone-shaped skull like that. That's why she wore that big hat. And her daughter as well. I had this friend who he had a son working in, or his father actually worked with the OSS during World War II. And towards the end of the war, numerous German submarines pulled into South American ports and filled up with provisions and sailed to Antarctica and never returned. And in Antarctica, you know, those ice caps are several miles thick. I mean, it's a lot of ice. They have found a lake underneath one of these ice caps that I think the ceiling is like 1,500 feet up. It's a big ice dome, and the thing is 1.5 miles long and 0.5 mile wide. And it's fresh water. Very interesting stuff. Anyway.
With critters living in it.
The what?
And critters are living in it.
What kind of critters?
Like an octopus. It's macroscopical, except for, yeah, the one he's talking about. Types of rodent and others.
I didn't know that.
One other thing I forgot to mention, one of the theories is that Mars was a moon and that there was a planet, a super Earth, that existed where the asteroid belt is now, and that there was a war and it got destroyed. And that's where the asteroid came from. Asteroids. And if you notice, one side of Mars has pock marks from explosions, and the other side doesn't.
That planet was the Earth.
That planet was called Tiamat.
No, that was the planet that hit it. The one that was in orbit there that left the shards that are the asteroid belt was the Earth. It was slowed down and it fell into a lower orbit where we are now.
What's another theory to think about?
Yeah.
I still don't know who parked the moon.
I think we, that's it. We get, our speaker gets to, we get to respond to the remarks and close this meeting. We get the last word.
I'll make this pretty fast. You know, when I was a geology student, probably about 1957, the paleontology professor came in and he was laughing, and it turned out that the Geological Society, that they had found a mammoth that had been quick frozen, and it looked like the meat was still good. And so what they did was they served mammoth burgers to the people who were attending this meeting, and everybody got sick. I don't have anything more. It was more interesting listening to you guys than listening to me. So anyway, I had a lot of fun putting it together.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for tonight. See you all next week. Our speaker, they kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know, and our speaker is still here if you want to talk to him. But our formal meeting is over. Thank you.
Thank you.